We are going to do something really special today, which is we're going to be taking a solid tan paint and we're going to be turning it into a distressed wood finish. It's pretty incredible just by layering some colors that you can give a solid finish so much depth that it actually looks like distressed wood. I've done it on 3 different things around my home. I've kind of perfected the art and was a Pinterest sensation for my faux wood finishes. So I'm really excited to be able to teach you a little more sophisticated version of that. We're going to talk first about the supplies because it's always so much better to start out with everything ready to go so you never have to stop in the middle of a paint project to run to the store to buy something you don't have. So I'm going to just walk through some of the basics, but first, let's talk about what you need to do before you ever apply anything to your furniture. So the base color that I'm using is called Antler Velvet from Sherwin Williams. It's just a basic tan paint color. This color may not be the perfect base color for your home. You may want to do something with a little different undertone, but that's what works in my house. And I'm going to show you really what you need to do to develop what your final outcome is going to look like. And practice. Yes, friends, practice is so critical. So what I'd like you to do is, there's these really inexpensive foam boards. They're in your supply list. Is paint the color of your furniture, the whole thing first, which is what I've done. So this is Antler Velvet. Then start playing around with the layers of glaze that I'm going to start telling you about as we go forward. So you can see I started with a solid color. I applied one glaze. I applied another glaze. And finally, I decided that I didn't like one of the top coat glaze colors, and so I landed right here. I am working with some other wood furniture in my room. So what I'd like you to do is once you get that sample board where you think it needs to be, I'd like you to compare it to any other wood finishes in your room, any other paint finishes, fabrics, just to make sure you love it before you apply any of the glazes that we're going to talk about to your actual furniture. And it was interesting that I ended up, this is the color that I'm going to do on top. So playing around with that final finish glaze will really transform what the undertone of the faux wood finish is. This truly is more art than science. I wish I could tell you the specifics, but I'm going to show you more the colors that I use and the layers that I apply and the order that I go in to get this particular look. And so you need to practice on sample boards until you feel perfectly comfortable that you're ready to apply anything to your furniture first. I mean, I can't repeat that too many times. I just want you to be happy with your final results. So let's talk about what supplies we're going to need. So I normally talk about high quality brushes when I talk about any kind of a paint finish. But what's interesting is when you do a faux wood finish, you're going to be pretty rough on your brushes because we're going to be doing a lot of brushing back and forth, which is totally different than applying just a basic paint. I like a straight, not an angled brush. So just a straight brush, and a little bit wider is better for a piece of furniture because it's going to, you're not going to have to put as much effort into applying the glazes as possible if you use a little wider brush. So this is what I'm recommending. So that type of brush. And then the other thing is to have handy, definitely you want gloves because it's kind of a messy situation while you are applying the glaze. And it's kind of nice too, if you need to wipe anything off, you can use your gloves. And then the other thing you're going to need is paper plates. I unfortunately bought these really tiny ones, so I have multiples, but if you have a larger, like dinner size paper plate, we are going to be blotting off excess glaze into our paper plate. And then the other couple things that you definitely need to have in your supply list is your antiquing glaze. So Valspar antiquing glaze is what I recommend because that's what we're going to be applying. And then we're going to be mixing some colors into a clear glaze. So just make sure you have some clear glaze there. And then finally, I am going to be mixing some paint colors into my clear glaze. One is going to be a dark brown. The other is going to be a silvery gray. And I'll give you some recommendations of some silvery grays. Mine is Repose gray. I'm using what I have around. I recommend that to everybody. go look at the mist tint rack in a Lowe store by the paint department. You may be able to pick up little samples that are the colors that you need for just $1 or so. So check there first before you ever have anything tinted. If you have to have it tinted, these little samples are only $5, and the most economical way to go ahead and do any faux wood finish. Now let's talk about the layers of paint that we're going to be applying. So I have a specific method that I go through that I like to use, which is to start with the lightest color, then I go to the darkest color, and then I go to the mid-tone. And that way, that creates the most depth of character. And I think my little secret sauce in my faux wood finishes is I like to add that little silvery undertone of a wood that's weathered before I apply any kind of wood grain on top of that using the antiquing glaze. And then finally, that final glaze really is going to be kind of the final color that you're going to want of the wood tone itself. But in reality, we've got our base color, so that's color number 1. We've got our silvery tone, that's color number 2. We've got our dark wood tone, that's color number 3. And then we have our final glaze, which is color number 4. All those 4 colors, which trust me, it's going to be easy to apply these, are going to layer up and look so beautiful and look like that distressed wood. So next, I'm going to show you how to mix, because the first one we're going to do is that silvery color, how to mix the clear glaze with your gray paint color and what those proportions need to look like and why we are doing what we are doing. I'll see you back here in just a little bit. Okay, so you're not going to see my face. I think it's more important that I focus on how you actually mix the glaze. First and foremost, obviously I protected the surface that I'm mixing on just because this is really not a cleanable surface. So I recommend you do that as well. This is just simple painter's plastic, which you likely have on hand now because you probably took my other furniture painting class. So it really comes in handy to protect your surfaces. The other thing you're going to need is your clear mixing glaze. You're going to need the color that you're going to be mixing in with the clear mixing glaze. You are going to need 2 different spoons. This one is actually a plastic spoon that looks like metal. That's my last one. I wish I had another one. Or you can use just a basic spoon out of your drawer, and you're just going to make sure you rinse it out really, really well. And then I like to have a paper towel on hand to set down everything when I get finished. And then just a ceramic bowl straight out of my kitchen. And again, everything is going to be able to be rinsed out of here. And don't worry about any of the paint or the glaze interfering with the bowl. But just make sure it's a smooth surface. So what we're going to do first is we are going to start with the paint color itself. I want to make sure that you mix your paint really, really well because you want that color and all the resin to be settled in. And I'm going to tip this a little bit because I've used quite a lot of paint out of here. And you're going to see I'm going to drip, and that's why I protect the surface. And we're just going to add that to the bowl. So I'm just going to be dumping the paint directly into the bowl. I'm probably going to do 2 different maybe 3 different spoonfuls of paint. My dresser is not large. I would judge how much glaze you actually make based on the size of your furniture and how far it needs to go. So we're just going to add that to the bowl. And so you understand from a ratio perspective, the more paint you add, the more color you're going to get. So the ratio between glaze and paint is really important. So, if you do like 75% paint, 25% glaze, you're going to get most of that color showing through, which is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to still add more paint. I kind of know how to do this just by eyeballing it. So I'm going to add a little more paint. I just don't want to have to mix this again if I don't have to. Get that all in there. Then I'm going to set my spoon aside. And then the next thing you're going to add, so you can see how much paint I have in there. It's not a ton. So what I do, 4 spoonfuls. And then, because I did 4 spoonfuls, I'm going to do a nice dollop of glaze. Okay? So you can kind of see what that looks like. And then what you're going to do is stir it all together and mix that glaze in with the paint. Now, why we do this, why we mix the paint and the glaze and not use just straight paint, is because antiquing glaze and mixing glaze create a longer working time or open time. So what that means is you're going to have a longer time to work the paint, and also it will dry a little bit slower. So you have the ability to manipulate it. So I want to make sure that you get everything stirred in really, really well. And you can see, because it's a clear mixing glaze, that really basically just looks like paint. But trust me, it's a little bit different because we added that glaze, that it's a little bit runnier. You can probably see that on camera. A little bit runnier, so it's going to be easy to manipulate. And that should be plenty to get my whole dresser done. If not, I can mix up doing the same ratio. So 4 tablespoons and 1 tablespoon of glaze. So 4 tablespoons of paint and 1 tablespoon of glaze. Keep your spoon in your bowl, so as you're going through the process, keep stirring everything up and make sure that glaze and that paint are mixed really, really well. So I'm going to clean all this up, and then I will see you back and we will start applying the glaze. So yes, I am down on the ground. We are going to start on the side. I always like to start with a side or an area that I know is not going to be like the most important area of the piece of furniture, so I can practice a little bit first just to make sure I love what's happening. So let's talk about, because of that, a few things that you need to have on hand. I would definitely make sure you have a damp paper towel on hand, because what's so amazing about glaze is you can wipe it right off. If you feel like you've over applied it, you don't like the color, you can literally wipe it right back off immediately. The other thing to have on hand is your paper plates. So hopefully you have bigger ones than I do. So I've got multiples here. Then you need your brush that I recommend. I always like to make sure there are no like loose fibers or anything, so just brush it off. Obviously I've got on gloves. And last but not least, our glaze that we just mixed. So you can see how much I have in here. It's quite a lot. I promise it's going to cover this whole piece of furniture. So what we're going to do to start, I'm going to get my paper plate, and I am going to tap, and actually I'm going to have to move my spoon out of the way because my brush is really big. I'm going to move my spoon and just set it on one of those paper plates. So you're going to use your big brush. You are going to tap it very lightly into the glaze. So make sure you get a bowl where your brush will fit. And I'm going to show you real quickly on camera how much glaze I have on that brush. It's not very much at all. Then what I want you to do is tap off any excess glaze onto that paper plate. So just tap it off so you don't have a ton of glaze. You're going to be surprised how little product you actually need to use to create a finish. So you can see why I wish I had a bigger paper plate. But okay, I needed to film today, so I'm going for it. Okay? I'm going to push as much out as I can, and then I'm going to show you what my brush looks like. So this is what my brush looks like now that I've tapped that into the plate. And what we're going to do is we are going to do long strokes. So I'm literally going to hit all of these areas because my goal is to get as much of this glaze off before I start working it in. So I'm just going to demonstrate. Like I said, this is more art than science. So as I go, I'm going to see how the finish starts turning out, and then I'm going to manipulate it after that so you can watch me work. So again, we're going to start in long strokes, and we want to get all of the glaze off of the brush before we ever get any more. And I'm going to go along here a little bit, and you can see it's already creating kind of a pattern. And don't worry about this. We're going to keep manipulating this paint. So if you feel like you have some heavy areas, don't worry about it. But you see how far this glaze is going? So I'm going to hit this up here just a little bit. You can see how little glaze I had, and I'm going to keep going because I still have glaze on my brush. And run it along the bottom and along the feet and the back, and then there's a little side under here. So, make sure you bend down, look around. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap off even more glaze. So if you still feel like you have glaze, literally wipe it off on the plate. because we are going to start working this in so you can still see I have glaze. And what we're going to do is hold your brush like this. So keep the bristles flat like this. And I want you to start working it in. And you can see how it already is starting to make a pattern. Now, I think this area is too heavy. So I'm going to keep working off the glaze, because we don't want it to look solid. But all of the intricacies of applying the glaze add all this character. Okay, right here, see that dot? I don't like that dot. So with my damp paper towel, that's why I have these handy, I'm going to show you, you literally can wipe it off. I feel like it's a little heavy right here. I'm going to wipe it off. So see how easy that is? You just take, if you feel like an area is a little too heavy, just take your paper towel and wipe it down a little bit. Then you're going to take your brush. See, I feel like all this is a little bit heavy. I'm going to keep playing with that. And then you're going to keep working in that glaze. And it really does go very fast. I'm going slower because I'm teaching you. Now, start turning your brush. I literally have to keep going and look at what I'm doing instead of look at you. So I hope that's okay with you. And I'm working that in. And so where I hit those areas, I literally will take my brush and start like forcing the paint and glaze back into the surface and work it in like that. You can see I'm rough on the brush, and that's a good thing. And so we don't really care about these brushes when we get finished with them. That's why you buy cheap brushes, so you can throw them away. I want to show you real quickly what this other side looks like, because they're not going to be a total exact copy of each other, but the goal is to walk and look around and make sure you're applying about the same amount of coverage of glaze so they relate to each other. Remember, we're going to be applying 2 more colors on top of this. So this is just our base coat. So don't worry about it too much, but try to get it as close as you can to give you that kind of striated, weathered, silvery wood finish. Okay, so we are going to work on these drawers, and what I would say is make sure you take any hardware off before you get started. The other thing is you definitely want to have the ability to open and close your drawers. I'm able to do that. So I can literally stick my finger here and open up my drawers, but I would recommend you work top to bottom just to keep the flow going. I'm going to start with this molding. I'm going to go down the sides, and then I'm going to work on the drawer fronts. But what I'm going to have to do is open up the drawer just a little bit just to do the framing to make sure I get everything covered. First and foremost, I want you to look at your brush. If you did not work off all that glaze on the last thing that you applied, I want you to make sure that you don't have any glaze on your brush, and you can use a paper towel to wipe it off. You can use the paper plate to get it off. But literally, I usually work the glaze in so much that I don't have anything left. So we're going to go through the same process. And what I want to show you is you are lightly dipping this brush in the glaze. And then what I want you to do is just knock off some of that glaze on the edge of the bowl. I want to show you what my brush looks like. I think that's really the most important thing. And then again, we're going to tap that glaze. And that is more to, first of all, get the excess glaze off of the brush, but also kind of get an even coverage on all of those bristles. And what we're going to do that's a little bit different on this side, see, I can see I have too much glaze on that top part. I'm going to tap a little bit more until I feel comfortable. And then I want to show you what my brush looks like. I'm going to start on the side first, and I'm going to turn my brush this way because it's going to fit into that space. Because what we're trying to do is create that wood grain look, but I want you to see how lightly I'm going to do this. That I'm barely touching the surface, and I'm just going to knock some of that glaze. See, I knew there was too much right there. But that's okay because we're going to end up either wiping it off or working it in. Okay, yeah, there's definitely too much glaze on there. So I'm going to go to another paper plate, and I'm going to really wipe that off before I start working that in. Yeah, there's way too much glaze on there. See, I want you to see the problems I have so you know how to handle it. All right, too much glaze, not happy with that. So what you can do is with your damp paper towel, these come in handy, is I want you to wipe it off. Literally wipe off anything that you over apply. Okay? And see, that takes care of that problem. Then what you can do too is take your brush and run it along your paper towel to get that glaze off, and then start working it in. Okay? And what I like to do, because I'm always trying to get that glaze off my brush, is work in long expanses. And so we're going to go down here, and that's why this is tough, is like I have to keep moving. Obviously, I want my furniture to look good just like you do, but I have to keep moving in order to keep this glaze being worked in. Okay, see, now that's starting to look good. You can see it's getting that wood grain look, and it doesn't feel over applied. It's okay. I'm hitting these edges of the drawer fronts. We're going to go across. Try to not hit the top as much as you possibly can. That's what I'm trying to not do. You can pounce to give different textures. So actually, I'm going to do that along here. I like the way that's looking. It's just pounce it in and then run it to get it all like worked in. It's a workout, friends. You're going to see me sweat through this. Tap it, swirl it, tap it, whatever you got to do to get that blended in. And then I think I'm going to start just kind of going along here. See, you see how light I start at first? I mean, I'm barely touching just to see how much glaze I have first before I really get aggressive with applying the glaze. Because if I have a lot of glaze on there, I don't want to push down too much. So I'm going to work in that frame because I don't have much glaze, which is perfect. That's what you want. You'll see little highlights pop up. And I'm going to keep working that in. And just so you know, what we're going to do, I'm going to wait until I get all this glaze applied to all the drawer fronts. Then I'm going to open them up. And I'm just going to hit the edges when I have very little glaze on my brush. Ooh, this is looking so cool. I get so excited about making over my furniture. Sorry for the noise. But I'm going to keep working my brush into the drawer front. I feel like I need a tiny little bit more glaze. So again, I'm going to dip my brush kind of on that edge of the bowl, not in, but on the edge. Tap it off a little bit, and I'm going to very gently, I need some on this side, drag it, to start adding some glaze. Hopefully you can see how light my touch is. And pouncing is always a good thing if you can, do a little pouncing. And it's even down, like if you've got little grooves like I do, just get your brush down in there. And then we're going to just work that in one more time. And get that faux wood grain look. Now I feel like the whole face of this dresser is in, good alignment with each other. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little bit of glaze on my brush. And I'm going to go to the inside of these, kind of the edges of the drawer. To use my fingernails. I'm lucky because the way these drawers are, I'm going to hold this and I'm just going to run my brush along the edges just to get a little bit of glazing. So when I open the drawer, it looks the same. And you want to make sure you don't get it on the face. What we're going to do next is we're going to work on the top and then we'll be done with that first coat of glaze. Pretty cool, right? Okay, now we're going to tackle the final piece, which is the top. Now, sorry, I've got to have everything behind me, and I'd recommend that anytime you're putting glaze on your brush or manipulating things, you keep it away from your actual furniture. You don't want to spill, you don't want to splatter, you don't want to create problems for yourself. So I'm going to keep everything back here, and then I'm going to swirl it around in my plate, tap, try to get that glaze blended into the bristles as much as possible. The other thing is I did get a brand new damp paper towel, I don't want to have any glaze on there, so if I have to manipulate the top, obviously this is the top. We want to be super duper careful. Using the same technique and brush. I'm going to start on the top, and I'm going to go very lightly with my brush. And it's nice and easy because this is a long expanse without any areas that I have to be mindful of because there aren't, there's not any detail on here. I'm going to pounce, pounce, pounce. I want to create depth and dimension. So I'm going to do a little pouncing on the top because it is so smooth. It's important to add character where it doesn't exist because this is it's just a one-dimensional thing we're creating into a 3D thing. And I'm going to blend that in, and you can see how aggressive I'm being. I'm really, really working hard to blend in that glaze. And friends, voila, that is it. I mean, really, truly, that's how easy it goes. So make sure you let your glaze dry at least 2 hours. If you want to wait longer, great. Put a little timer on your phone so you never come back too soon because we don't want to take off the glaze that we just applied. We want to make sure it's fully adhered to the surface. All right, I'm going to go inside into cool air conditioning. And next time you see me, we're going to be applying antiquing glaze. Our silvery glaze is nice and dry, so we are ready to go to the next step, which is antiquing glaze. And I have it here behind me. And what's so nice about antiquing glaze is you don't have to do any mixing. You don't have to worry about ratios. You don't have to count spoonfuls of paint. It is what it is. It is a dark, dark, dark brown, almost bordering on black. But what this color does is it looks like that natural wood grain that you see when wood gets stained, and that's what this antiquing glaze is going to mimic. So next I'm going to show you just how to put it in your bowl and swirl it around and just get it prepared and ready to be applied. We are going to be using the same type of brush. I am using a brand new brush because my other brush is drying. I let this dry about 2 hours, and I'd say antiquing glaze is a little more challenging. We are going to make sure we get a ton of it off of our brush. So some helpful tools around are going to be paper towels. You definitely want your little paper plates. And again, we're going to use our gloves and have a damp paper towel. So in case you feel like you've over applied it in some areas, then you can go ahead and wipe it down like I showed you before. So I'm going to meet you down on the side. We're going to start the same place that we did with the silvery glaze and just talk through how to apply that antiquing glaze. Again, we're using our brush, and oh gosh, I have to tell you, antiquing glaze, because it's so dark, you really have to make sure you take as much as you can off of the bristles of the brush before you ever start applying. It's really easy to over apply. You can see how much antiquing glaze that's already on the bristles of my brush. So I want to make sure I take as much of that off as I possibly can before I start application. So we're going to use the same process. We're going to pat and swirl all of that glaze. I mean, I'm going to actually wipe and get it off as much as possible onto the plate. And then I'm also, with this, see how dark it is? I'm also going to wipe it off on a paper towel. So we have very little antiquing glaze on that brush. Okay, so you can see how much I have on the brush. Now, we're going to take the same approach. We're going to do things very lightly and gently. I think I'm going to start at the bottom just to see how much antiquing glaze. Okay, and I'm going very gently and lightly with this antiquing glaze just to start giving it some wood grain characteristics. I don't want to be too heavy-handed with this. It's okay if you get, little areas, but what we're trying to do is make it look like stained wood is the goal. And you're gonna be amazed how it looks like wood grain. That's why it's called faux distressed wood. I feel like I got a little too much right there, and I use my glove and just brush it in. I'm not gonna wipe it off. Okay. And I'm going to keep applying, and I'm really very gentle with this in order to get down into this crevice, I'm going to turn my brush just a little bit, just so I apply some glaze down in there. And I'm going to start working, and as I told you, I like to work off as much glaze as I can in long expanses. And now I'm going to start hitting this a little bit and try to work that glaze off as much as possible. See, and you can see the way you use your brush, like right here, I kind of over applied it. I'm going to wipe that a little bit, but it's okay because we can literally, once this glaze is off our brush, we can start working all of that back into the furniture itself. It's always a hard feeling at the very beginning to get going. That's why I always say start with an area that isn't as important, that you're not going to see as much. But you can see how very little glaze I had on my bristles and how far that tiny little bit of glaze is going to creating a whole new look on this piece. Now, I am not liking how heavy this is, but I got to be careful because I don't want to take the glaze off underneath. So I'm very gently going to wipe this down a little bit. And then I'm going to work it back in with my brush. Don't apply any more glaze on it. And that's why it's so important that we I'm going to pounce to blend it in. That's why it's so important that we let the glaze underneath dry in case we have to wipe off any of that antiquing glaze, because you could take off the glaze that was underneath, that silvery glaze. Okay, and I'm just going to keep working this in until I literally feel like I have nothing, absolutely nothing left on my brush. There we go. I'm going to pounce up in these corners. And wow, I mean, it's amazing how that glaze, it looks like there's a wood grain in there, even though there's not. Now, what I'm going to do, because I've got to go into a small area, I'm not going to dip my brush. I'm literally going to use what's on this plate. And I'm going to do the feet and underneath because we don't want a ton of glaze. We just want to get some of that off the brush onto the surface of the furniture. Because if I were to go dip that back in, it really would be too heavy. So I'm going to do everything I can not to have to do that. And just get as much off this plate, where it's in the crevices, and put it back onto the furniture. And see how fast that goes? I mean, it's like a miracle, right? It's already on there and voila, we're done. So I'm going to move to the other side just like I did before. So here's the other side, and it's just naturally going to curve where you're going to have heavy spots just where you apply your brush. But overall, we're just trying to create that look of wood grain on the surface. And like I said, both sides are not going to look the same, but I just wanted to show you what this side looks like before we move to the front. So now we're going to move to the front, which always makes me nervous, I'm not going to lie, and it may make you feel nervous as well. We are going to make sure we get as much of that glaze off as we possibly can before we get started on the side. I'd recommend getting a fresh set of paper towels and just wiping your brush off again on a paper towel. And also get a fresh paper plate so you can start dabbing. And also what I'm going to do just to kind of test to see how much glaze is in my brush, I'm going to run it along here to see, it's antiquing glaze is amazing at how far it goes, but it's also tough because how far it goes that you don't think you have very much in your brush, and you still do. You can see how I wiped it off on that paper towel, and I can still antique all through this section. And again, these areas, it's nice to pounce just to give another texture. Looks good. Now let's see if I can get any more off. So now it looks like I've truly run out of glaze. So we're going to, so gently, we're going to tap our bristles into this glaze. I'm talking like very little into the bottom of that bowl. You can see how much glaze I have on my brush. Then we are going to swirl and tap onto our plate to get as much of that glaze off as I possibly can. And then we are going to, sounds like my mailman is here. We're going to brush it off onto the paper towel. You know, why I'm trying to get as much glaze off of this brush as I can. I feel like using that damp paper towel to try to wipe any glaze off is a bad idea because it's wiping off that silver underneath because it's not totally stable yet. So we are going to do our best to avoid doing that. I think our better strategy is when we go over with the final color, that any areas that feel heavy or dark, we're just going to fill them in with color. So I am going to, see, I'm worried about these little bristles right here. I'm going to hit those one more time. I'm going to start down this expanse, turn my brush. And it's, you know, it's just natural that I settled in on that spot, but that's okay because, you know, when you think about it, wood has knots and grains, and just like I did before, to get some of that glaze off my brush, I'm going to go down the long expanses because it's just easier. And then I'm going to very gently start trying to get some of this glaze off of this brush. And then I'm going to work in that little section once I don't have as much glaze here. And I'm going to go down to the feet. And I'm going to do this expanse. Go all the way across, working as much of that glaze in and off of my brush. Then I can start working this in. And you can see I can blend that nicely. Hit the corners. And then it looks more like wood grain. Just by going back and forth. And just working it in. You notice I haven't added any more glaze to my brush. I'm still working off my brush. It is so important with how dark this glaze is. Sometimes I will, I guess maybe if you're a beginner, sometimes I will cut the antiquing glaze with a little bit of clear glaze. You may want to try that on your practice boards to see if you feel like you can control the glaze. I think it's hard to do that. It makes the glaze like really runny and goopy, but it's something to think about and to try. And again, I like to pounce down into these little channels because it's really hard to, you know, get that look just by brushing. And you can see I'm catching the edge of this drawer, which is perfectly fine. And we're gonna go over this one more time just to blend in that glaze. Ooh, that looks nice. Now I'm gonna go over here. So I'm gonna start with trying to get some glaze off of the plate first before I dip it, because I'm trying to avoid dipping it as much as possible. And you should too. Yeah, there wasn't enough really to make any difference on here. So I'm gonna have to do it. So we're gonna, I mean, literally like lightly stick my brush in there. I'm gonna swirl it on the plate. Try to get as much as I can off and work into those bristles evenly. Then I'm gonna do the same thing. I like to find like a new edge of my paper towel, and we're gonna wipe off that glaze on our paper towel. That makes sense. See? Just wipe it off on that paper towel before we apply. And also pay attention to these little strange little fibers that are popping up. Okay. I'm gonna very gently go down here and start creating that wood grain finish. Yeah, that's good. That really work hard to get that glaze off. It's gonna make everything go a lot easier. Okay, that's looking pretty good right away. Now I'm gonna brush even more glaze off before I work it in. And you can see I'm tough on this brush. I told you I'm gonna be tough on this brush. I'm gonna work it off. And then I'm gonna use this brush to blend in and create those wood stroke patterns. And see how that just blended that little section in? Pretty cool, right? And I'm gonna keep, while my brush doesn't have much glaze on it, I'm gonna keep blending in that glaze. Looks really good. And hit some of this. All right. This is going so fast. I'm so excited. So let's get a little more glaze. Ooh, these little guys. I'm gonna have to be careful with those. See, this is where it gets difficult. So you can see on my brush, I only have glaze kind of on the ends, and that's why I think it's critical that you swirl your brush and like brush down and swirl, because you want to wipe off and align those fibers of the brush that are kind of all over the place before you put it on the paper towel. Okay. So we're gonna find a brand new section of our paper towel. Now we are going to take our brush and find another part of the paper towel and get as much glaze off as possible. And I mean, I'm literally gonna turn this every which way. Now, start at the top. I'm gonna go across and start dragging and just see how much glaze, and then go up and over. Turn your brush over and down and across. I am using the lightest touch on these parts because I don't want to over apply the glaze and make it too heavy or dark. I want to have the ability to blend it in and still have some of that silver showing through. But do you see how it's creating dimension? Because we have two colors. And I also want it to relate to what I've already done. So I keep my eye, I just keep looking between sections just to make sure that everything is looking similar. And get that glaze on nice and evenly as possible. And I could see there was a lot of silver glaze, probably from when I went over the top. So I filled that in with this antiquing glaze. And I don't have as much glaze over here. So my brush is getting a little bit drier. But again, I'm gonna take a whole new paper towel. I'm gonna wipe it off another time before I start blending it in, because I really don't want to add any more glaze to this. I just want to have the ability to blend it in. So we can still work that glaze because it's still damp and create that faux wood grain finish. If you wanted to leave it right here and have it look more like a driftwood finish, you could totally stop and leave it right here. All right. Woohoo! One drawer done. Okay, so I finished all of the antiquing glaze on the face and on the side. I'm feeling good about the way this is looking. The last thing we have left to do is to do the top. And why I always wait to do the top is I like to get my technique down, because that's going to be such an important part of the furniture, that I usually do that last. And it's also easier because there's long expanses, and so I've got my brush technique down by the time I go up to the top, because there's no room for error, is there? All right, I'll see you up there next. One more area left to do. Isn't that exciting? And then we're going to be finished for the day. So I want you to go off and have fun. I am going to too. What I did is, the brush is still the same. I have new paper towels. I have a new paper plate, because this is the top. I want to be really, really mindful of not over applying that antiquing glaze. And I have the same used bowl of glaze. So I'm going to try to really tap off as much of the glaze in the bowl as I possibly can. Then same drill, swirl and brush, and you can see that helped me get some of that glaze off. I'm going to brush it off on my paper towel as well. So we're going to get that glaze off as much as possible. So I'm going to get glazing, and there's very little glaze on this brush, which is good. And I'm going to keep turning it because I can see there's some heavy areas. I'm going to keep working really fast. so I don't get heavy-handed in too many areas. And you can see I'm gonna pounce. I like to pounce the top, like I said, because it's so flat. It deposits that glaze in new areas. And then we're gonna work that glaze in. And I like having some of these heavy areas. Again, it reminds me of the knots in wood. You can see I'm being rough as can be to get that glaze off my brush, because I don't want to have to go get you. I don't have to. So turn your brush, move your brush. Then I'm gonna set this down. I want to align my bristles again because I've been doing that. And I'm gonna go like that, and then we're gonna work this in. One last heavy time. Everything looks, and just keep running my brush across and blending in maybe where I'm going to hit the edges a little heavy to blend in that glaze. It's almost like you're pulling it back off. Ta-da! It's kind of my favorite thing to do at the end. Is a big ta-da! I am definitely going to let this dry overnight. I just feel like it's going to get too gummy and tacky if I don't. I highly recommend you don't push this process and give yourself a little bit of break. It is a lot of work to work in that glaze, and come back after you've let it dry and start fresh the very next day. You have let your piece of furniture dry 8 hours, right? I went to sleep, let this dry overnight, so it's dried actually longer than 8 hours. I want to make sure that the glazes that we applied underneath are nice and sound and secure before we apply the final and third glaze. So let's talk a little bit about the supplies that you're going to need today. So today, the glaze is going to be a little bit different. We are going to be mixing a paint sample, which this is called Universal Umber from Valspar, with the clear mixing glaze. And we are going to do it in a 50-50 ratio because we want more glaze and we want it to flow and move a whole lot more than any of the other glazes that we used. This application is going to be different in that we are not going to be working so hard to work that glaze in. This is going to be more like a paint application where we're going to create color and texture. So the other thing you need, you washed out your brushes, right? I would suggest having both brushes on hand. We're going to do application with one, and then we may want to drag with the other. So once I get applying, we'll see if I need both brushes. So please have both brushes handy. You are going to need your paper plates. Hopefully you have the larger size. So we're going to do a little blotting, some paper towels, and then our gloves. We need our gloves again. Today's glaze, we are going to be mixing the clear mixing glaze with a paint sample. And today we're going to do things a little bit differently. Get your 2 spoons. We are going to do a 50-50 mix of color to glaze. And I'm going to start with the color. This one is called Universal Umber, and you can see I've played with it before testing the color, and I want a lot more glaze today because this is going to be applied a little bit differently. So I'm going to do 4, and this time I'm actually going to do 4 spoonfuls of paint. And then we are going to do equal parts of clear mixing glaze. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to stir that up really, really well. You can see the consistency is nice and runny. That's what we want. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be doing things just a little bit differently today. And I want to demonstrate before I put any glaze on this brush that today we are literally going to be applying to create boards. So we're going to be applying like this to make it look like wood in another different way. So I want you to practice on a sample board if, that doesn't feel comfortable to you before you ever get started. There will be no taking off glaze today. I mean, I guess technically we could rub it in. It would give it a whole nother layer, but the goal is just to apply and to walk away. So we are gonna dip our brush into the glaze, just like we did the other days. And we are gonna blot it off like we did before, but not as much. So I'll show you how much I have on my brush. So that's how much I have on my brush. Start up on the top first and work my way down. So we're going to do a very, very, very light touch. It's going to look more like paint today than glaze. And I'm going to start getting some long expanses to get some of this glaze off my brush. Then I'm going to take this other brush and I'm going to work this in. And yes, we're going to be covering up a lot of what was underneath with our glaze. And we're going to just feather that in because I had a lot of glaze. So that's why it's good to have your other brush handy, especially when you first start applying, to get a feel for how much glaze you actually need on the brush. So I need a little more glaze up here. And I'm doing my best to not get on the top. And it's okay if I do. We'll have time to work that in. Now, I'm going to go back to my plate. You can see how the glaze is a little bit different because it's waterier today. And we're going to start now. You see how I took that up there? And then I'm going to start working that glaze down. And then I'm going to use that brush to pull it. Do you see why this is more art than science? To pull it down. And then I'm going to work from the bottom up with some of that glaze that's still on there. And that's always going to be the hard part, is when you first start to apply, you're going to over apply the glaze. And so that's why having two brushes is really important. So I'm going to fill in some of those areas by turning my brush. And then I want to get into this channel. While I don't have a ton of glaze on my brush, I want to get into this channel and cover up that little corner area with glaze. So I'm hoping that you can see how different these areas look compared to the center section. We added a lot more warmth and dimension by adding that other color. This next section, I'm going to keep a little more glaze in my plate this time. And I'm going to brush it off on the plate like this, just to get some of that off of there. And then I'm going to very gently, I'm going to start barely touching because I want to have as much control over how much glaze is applied as I can. And try not to get up in that where you've already applied as much as possible. And you can see I'm working kind of top to bottom, bottom to top, because we're trying to create the look of boards. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to create the first board, because I feel like I have the right amount of glaze, and I'm just going to keep working it just up and down. We're not going to be as aggressive today, like I said. And so there, I feel good about that. Now, while I don't have a ton of glaze, I'm going to start working on the next board. I'm using board in air quotes. But it's just to give that look that boards have been assembled or it's natural wood. So where I see I don't have a lot of glaze, but I know I still have it on my brush, I'm working it into that area, but I'm keeping my brush moving in that same direction. If you need to turn for a small area, or you feel like you have an area you missed, you can turn and get that glaze off. And then just run your brush down. And again, I'm going to run it down one more time to get that nice streaky effect. Okay, so hopefully that's showing on camera what I'm doing, but you can see how it's starting to look literally like wood. I'm pushing and running my brush in the same direction just to cover over what was underneath. And I'm going to turn my brush again. I can see I don't have any glaze right there. And we're going to work that in one more time. And voila! Isn't that amazing? It looks totally different. It looks like distressed wood now, and it's going to dry and be so beautiful. Umber is, and I can see I don't have a lot of glaze there. I'm going to put a little bit more on. So sit back and look at it. Umber is a base color for a lot of things. It's a very classic, base to paint colors. And so that's why I chose it, because it occurs in nature. Umber is a color that occurs in nature. All right. Okay. And then this is the hard part. I swear to you, this is the hardest part. Walk away. So I'm going to leave this. It's beautiful. And I'm going to move and do the other side off camera. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to check the top. I may change my mind and decide I want to do the top before I move back down. So either you're going to see me doing the top or you're going to see me in front doing the drawers, but we're only going to do the framing in one drawer, so we don't make this video so long. All right, I'll see you again in a second. Okay, so when I stood up, I can see I got a little bit of glaze on the surface of the top. So what I want you to do is always stand up and look, and I want you to feather it in. And we know we want boards running this way and that way. So I want you to pull that glaze into the surface so you don't get any, strong lines. And if you get some, that's okay. It's distressed wood, but just take your brush, no more glaze on it, and just feather in any glaze that you hit the surface with. And we're going to do that all the way around, feathering. Okay, so I decided to start you off right here. What I want you to do is, while you don't have a ton of glaze on your brush, I want you to open up all your drawers before you get started. And I want you to hit all the tops and the sides to get that glaze applied. And you literally, if you want to, you can do it to all the drawers. I'll probably do it as I go. I don't know, we'll see. I'll see how much glaze I can actually get off this brush. But that's just a little trick so you don't over apply. All right. And then same thing, just run it down and stripe it off. So I feathered all of the edges of the drawers and then I pushed them closed. If you have drawers that stick, do not push your drawers closed. Leave them open. But you have to make sure you never ever touch. Once you apply glaze, don't let your fingers touch the glaze. It literally will leave a fingerprint. So if you do that accidentally, just take your brush and feather it in. So I dipped my paintbrush into the glaze and I'm just getting a lot of that glaze off. I may, because I'm going to be starting with these sides, I think I'm going to brush some of that glaze off on a paper towel just to be safe. And we're going to do the same thing where we're going to frame. So I think I will start here and then work my way down. I said earlier, this 50-50 mix, it really has a nice long working time, which means you can manipulate the glaze longer and move it around off of your brush and onto the furniture. Stand up, and I'm just going to feather anything that came onto the surface into the top. And it's okay if I don't keep moving because this glaze is going to have such a long working time. I'm going to go there next. But now it's time to create that nice wood grain pattern. And I can see I don't have enough glaze right here. And I do think I'm hitting that corner, so I'm going to move that a little bit, that glaze. Okay, now we're going to move to the drawer. I'm only going to do this one drawer just to show you because it's going to be too long to a video and get kind of boring. While I don't have a ton of glaze on my brush, I'm going to start applying these edges because it's going to be really hard to control the glaze in these little small areas. So it's just better if you work the glaze off your brush and into these sections. And I'm going to push that glaze down into this channel with my brush while it's not very wet. And you can see I'm tapping it, which is fine as long as I tap and then pull. I'm just going to go into the edge of my bowl to get a little more glaze because I don't want a ton. And see how much I have on my brush. And I'm going to really get a lot off before I start doing this drawer. So again, we're going to keep our hand light and gentle and start getting that glaze on. And you can see I'm turning my brush. I may end up applying the glaze on these drawers this way instead, because it's such a small space. Now I'm going to have to, I don't know, this is going to be a little harder. I mean, harder is a relative term, but I'm going to have to be a little more careful because I want to get everything looking like boards going across. So I'm going to get a little more glaze on my brush. I dipped that time to get more glaze because I'm pulling that glaze off. I don't want that to happen. I feel like I need more glaze. It's kind of interesting. I don't know why I'm feeling like I need more glaze, but I do. I think because I can't manipulate this as much, and I didn't like how this glaze was pulling off right here, that I feel like I just need it to be a little wetter. There we go. And I'm going to keep pulling that across. Do the same thing down here. Now I can see I'm not going perfectly straight, so I'm going to do my best. Some of that is the angle. I'm going to turn myself facing so I'm not facing you, I'm facing directly onto the piece of furniture. It's like artwork, friends. It really is. We're painting wood on a flat surface. Pretty cool. And I think I'm going to turn my brush here while it's wet and just get some of this glaze on here so it's nice and wet. So I don't want to pull any more glaze off. I want to put it on. So now I'm applying glaze a little heavy in some areas where I can see there isn't any. Cover over that other glaze. And then I pulled some glaze off here, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And then I'm going to go directly across. Yeah, but even pulled it off here. So you're gonna feel when that happens. So I'm gonna just apply it. It does get tough. When your glaze starts to dry, it gets gummy. And it will start coming off. And so that's why it's important to keep working quickly before that glaze dries. And that's it. So, I mean, honestly, that's how I'm going to do the next drawer. I'm just going to keep making sure each drawer relates to each other and relates to the sides, that I have similar amounts of glaze. I have similar amounts of show through. I'm going to do this side, and then we're going to finish with the top, and that's going to be it. And I'm just thrilled with how this is turning out. It's a miracle how when you just put another color on top, from this to this, how different that looks. And what's neat too is I can see how this is drying and the color is spectacular. So something I wanted to talk about is the brush that I've been using for all of the other sides has gotten pretty thick and gloppy. And I really want the bristles to look like this when I do the top. So I'm actually going to set this brush aside and go back to the original brush. That's why it's good to always have two brushes. It's just the glaze starts glopping up in here and you don't want to use it because you can't drag as well. I'm going to show you how much glaze I have left, and almost nothing. So if you have a piece about this size, the 4 spoonfuls of paint and glaze is exactly what you need to do. Say you have a much bigger piece, double it. Just always keep that 50-50 ratio, or do 6 spoonfuls just so you have a little bit more glaze. All right, I have plenty of glaze to get this top done, so we're going to go through this process. I'm going to tap my brush down in there. I'm going to wipe it up. I don't want to get it near there. I'm going to wipe it on the side. I'm going to use my handy dandy little plate, I think, because I already have some glaze that I feathered in here. I think I'm going to start up here just to keep working with that line and keep my brush strokes really light, really gentle. And just same thing. So what we're trying to do is create stripes of boards across the top. Get all that glaze aligned and running in the same direction. So I'm going to turn my brush just to join those two areas, and then I'm going to do my best to go as straight across as I possibly can. I can see I don't have any glaze. And to go straight across again to pull some of that glaze back off. And one more time. And one more time. And actually, I want it more glaze off, so, okay. One more time. So you're going to notice when you're standing over the top, it's a lot easier to see what you're doing. Also, step around and look at it from the side. And you can also stand and drag down this way your brush like that to get everything aligned, which feels a lot easier than standing where I was standing. Very lightly, I'm going to go back and forth, get some of that glaze off my brush. We're going to use every ounce of that glaze. And I'm going to work it in the surface. So I am working it a little bit more because this is such a long expanse I can. And these little brush marks that I'm making, I can smooth in. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to do the same thing. The harder you press your bristles down, the more glaze, and you can flip your bristles like this to get some of that glaze off, which is what I'm feeling I want to do. Okay? This is drying so fast because I don't have as much glaze. I'm going to work really fast. So I'd say watch me work because you know what techniques I'm using. Yeah, I've got to work fast. Okay. So, here's the reality, folks. Go fast. And align that glaze. I'm like a dog licking a bowl. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go back and get that, that brush. I know there's a lot of glaze in there. And just work it into here. These are the tricks of the trade. That's why you take a class. And making sure if I stopped my brush at any point that I'm pulling that glaze through so it looks like boards. And it's nice when you have a piece you can physically reach across and do this too. And, oh my gosh, guess what? We are done! Woo! I absolutely love how this turned out. I, in my mind, can see what it's going to look like when it gets dry. And it's really, really cool. Sorry, you know what? It's never over till it's over. I can just see I need a little glazer right there. But honest to goodness, the top is almost dry. So I'm not going to touch it anymore. That's half the battle in this process is walking away. I'm literally going to take my gloves off so I don't do any more glazing. But what I would suggest is while you have a little glaze on that brush, just walk around your piece. I've been doing that off camera just to make sure you've got everything covered the way that you want. It's always easier to do it while you have everything wet and out. Now, let's talk about dry times. Dry time is going to be longer because we used a glaze. So in between glaze coats, I said 2 hours for the first 2, and then we let it dry overnight. I am definitely going to let this dry overnight. It's going to take a long, long, long time to dry because that glaze is designed to do that. So you can work the paint. Then you can put your hardware on. So definitely wait all night long. I mean, really touch and feel to see if you feel like it's dry enough to put your hardware on. You may be wondering if I'm going to clear coat this piece of furniture now that I've applied the faux finish. And the answer to that is yes. This is a piece of furniture that's going to get a lot of wear and tear. It's in my family room and guests will use it to put their drinks on it. I will too. And I don't want to have to worry about people having to use coasters. So I will use polyacrylic in a matte finish. I'm going to do 3 coats on the top and 2 coats on the sides and the face. And all you do is you sand lightly in between with 220 grit sandpaper in between coats of polyurethane. And then that last coat, you leave it alone. I am not going to film that as part of this tutorial. I recommend following the manufacturer's instructions with whatever polyurethane you decide to use. So next time you see me will be the final finish and I'll have the hardware back on and I can't wait to do the big reveal. Stand by my saying, Paint is magic. Isn't it incredible that this dresser used to be a really inexpensive white laminate or melamine, who knows what it was, but now it looks like a beautiful distressed wood with lots of character and all kinds of textures and tones. I am so happy with how it turned out. Now that I've got the hardware on there, I've cleared out all the clutter around it. And I just wanted to show you, yes, I did polyurethane it because honestly, I set a drink here every day and I just wanted to make sure that I had a lot of polyurethane on there. I did 3 coats on the top, 2 coats on the bottom, and I used an ultra flat or matte polyurethane. But I am so thrilled. It came out exactly like my sample board. So if you are watching this all the way through before you ever get started, make sure you play around with sample boards and get it right before you ever apply any paint to the surface. Cheers, we did it. We created a distressed wood finish. I hope you loved this class. Please, if you did, I would really appreciate that if you feel like you've made a new friend in me and you've learned some new skills, that you would share with your friends if they're interested in learning how to paint furniture, to come visit Porch Daydreamer and take a class from me. Let's go get back to our life and enjoy our furniture, and I hope to see you in a class again soon.